Hello, I'm Glenn Fulcher and I'll be leading the webinar on the 19th of April on the topic of assessing speaking. I've been interested in assessing second language speaking for a long time and I've written a lot about it as well. And I was looking through the literature in preparation for this webinar, and the very first book to be written on language testing by Robert Lardo in 1961, he was at the University of Michigan then, had really quite a long section for the time on assessing speaking. And he said, and this is on page 239, he said, "The ability to speak a foreign language is without doubt the most prized language skill, and rightly so." And I think he's right. People, myself and learners, really get quite excited when they have learned enough language that they're able to visit another country, they're able to communicate with people, and they're able to get things done. You know, the basic stuff of, ordering a meal or being able to negotiate their transport and things like this. And it's actually very, very exciting. It's much, much more, well, I believe it's much, much more important than being able to read literary texts, or as important as that may be at some point in a learner's career. But speaking is initially, if you could get there to communicate in an efficient way, is incredibly motivating for learners. Now, in this webinar, what I want to do is to talk about the kinds of ways in which we assess speaking. And I'm going to start off by talking about a little bit of background, traditionally why we've assessed speaking, where the interest in assessing speaking in the ways we do it today came from. That's a little bit of history. I'm not going to be dwelling on it too long, but I think it's important and it's interesting. I'll then be going on to concepts. What are we assessing? What do we think we're assessing when we listen to learners speaking? And we'll talk a little bit about constructs, about what it means to be able to speak a second language. The next bit is, well, once we know what it is we want to assess, how do we elicit the evidence to know whether or not the learners can do that? And when we talk about this, we'll be looking at different task types that we can use, how we can define those tasks, maybe even how we can do some classroom-based action research to find out something about the way our own learners operate with those tasks. The next one is how we assess speaking in terms of how do we score it, how do we say how good or how weak, maybe, a particular performance is. It's about assessing the quality of what learners do. And there we'll be talking about what in America you call rubrics. Over here we might call something like band descriptors or levels or scales and so on. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Next, I'll talk about planning for doing speaking assessments. Designing assessments, how we can create specifications, how we can work with others, with colleagues, to actually design assessment systems that work in our own context. And finally, the quality of the assessments that we carry out, how we use assessments, who's involved in the speaking, if we use raters, do we have to train the raters, interlocutors, sometimes learners might be speaking with their peers, but they also might be speaking with teachers or others. What are the issues there, and are there any training issues that we need to look at? And last but definitely not least, the feedback that we give to learners. What kind of feedback do they get, and how important is that for motivation, for their own learning, and for being able to assess where they are at the present and where they're going to go next. So this is going to be the content of the webinar. I've never done a webinar before, but I'm looking forward to it immensely, stepping out of my own comfort zone, and I will hopefully will be quite interactive. You'll be able to chat. I will try and follow what you're all saying, and there'll be some chances for you to contribute in other ways. So that's the 19th of April, and I will look forward to meeting you online then.